Predictive forecasts really matter when you think about what's happening inside a business today. But a lot of people don't understand the basics. So we're going to go through the basics. Here in Australia, we actually have something called the RBA, the Reserve Bank of Australia, and they set up something called the official cash rate. And the official cash rate moves over time, as we've seen with interest rate increases and decreases. Basically, the official cash rate was sitting at 4.35%. On top of that, we then have something we've got to call the bank's margin. So the bank's out of margin. It's roughly circa 2%. So 2% plus 4.35 now means that I'm actually in a position that it's actually 6.35% is probably the best variable rate that I'm going to be getting in market. Then on top of that, there's actually something called APRA, the Australian Prudential Regulatory Authority, and they actually set something called the buffer rate. And right now, at the time of recording, that's sitting at around 3%. So when you go and add that up, literally the 4.35 plus the 2 is 6.35 plus the 3, that's 9.35. Basically, you're being assessed as though you can repay repayments at 9.35 to maybe around, say, 10% when you actually go to get a home loan. Now, let's have a look at what was happening during the peak of the COVID era when money was basically free. We had an official cash rate circa 0.5%. We had a bank margin still at 2, that's 2.5%. And then also in addition to that, we actually had a buffer rate of only 2.5%, which means you were being assessed at literally around 5%. Now, if you think about that, you're being assessed at 5%, you're being assessed over here at literally 10%. What it actually equates to is around a 40 to 45% reduction in purchasing power. And so when you go to think about it, Josh might have been able to go and borrow $1 million literally back in 2021, same income, same assets, different lending criteria. We're now in a position right now, he might only be able to go and lend circa $650,000. I feel like I'm on that superannuation ad. Same income, same assets, two very different results. But the basic idea is to think very differently around what it is that you're doing, because if I can't spend as much, there's just not as many buyers that are going to be at the level. And that's why we've got a bit of a cap on prices, and we're not seeing that high level of competitive tension in every marketplace. And ultimately, we're not going to be pushing through the price barrier for rapid amounts of price growth across the majority of the country. So now more than ever before, if you understand about what's actually happening, then you can go and present that information in brand new ways. And we're seeing a lot of people say, oh, you know what, Josh, we're just going to wait for interest rates to go down. Well, Australia has actually got one of the cheapest official cash rates. What's actually happening in all of the majors compared to New Zealand, the UK, the UAE, and also to what's happening in the USA. So we were cheaper for longer on the official cash rate. And the reality of it is that if we had have had a very different Governor General on the RBA, we would have potentially seen another 2 increases in interest rates earlier this year. So when people say, you know what, there's been a big reduction in New Zealand, or there's a big reduction in the USA, it ain't Australia, man, because we've got a very different set of circumstances. Your ability to be able to read the play, tell a better quality story, really changes things. And when I hear a lot of buyers say, you know what, Josh, we're waiting for interest rates to go down, I'm like, they already have. The CBA and the NAB already dropped 0.25% across their variable rates. And what I actually think will be the number one thing to give relief in the Australian economy will not actually be a change in interest rates, but actually a change in the buffer rate, when APRA actually shifts from 3% to maybe 2.5%. And what you need to understand is that for every 0.5% of reduction, we're actually going to see a 5% increase in purchasing power. So if, for example, they drop the buffer rate by 0.5% or interest rates go down by 0.5%, then actually what we're going to see is a 5% increase in how much I can spend. So now all of a sudden, if I'm bidding up to $1 million, that same income, same assets borrower would be able to borrow over $1,050,000, so they can bid a bit more when it actually comes to auction. Learn how to read the markets, get better at your predictive forecasts so you know what's actually happening, because you actually end up providing better quality advisory to not only buyers, but also to sellers.